Welcome back from break, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today on day one of imaginAviation. My name is Abigail Glenn Chase, and I support the NASA Aeronautics Research Institute and imaginAviation. In the next hour, we're going to be exploring NASA's work with the emergency response community and the technologies NASA is developing to support frontline firefighters, local, state, tribal, and federal government agencies, and communities affected by natural disasters. Aerial support capabilities to aid in wildland fire operations, including for prescribed burns and other mitigative efforts, has become a NASA-wide priority. But why? And why now? Our amazing next guest is going to show us why. For the last 20 years, Tricia Passeri-Divick has worked in various roles in aviation, including corporate, commercial, and federal as an FAA air traffic controller. She currently works as a collaboration facilitator to help ensure that the Federal Aviation Administration and her union, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, continue to successfully work together on any issue that impacts the national airspace system. In December of 2017, her family's beloved home in Ventura, California, was completely destroyed in the devastating Thomas Fire. It took years for her and her husband, both federal employees as air traffic controllers at the time, and their two young children to rebuild and regain stability on the home front. Tricia, welcome to the imaginAviation stage, and thank you for sharing your very personal story with us today.
Absolutely. Abigail, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to be here with you and with everyone at NASA. I so appreciate the critical work that you all do, and I'm humbled to be able to share my family's stories. So again, thank you. I'll reflect back for a minute and touch on that day that you mentioned, Abigail, December 4th, 2017, a day that I will never forget. My family certainly will never forget. Has in some ways changed, the course of my family's future forever. On that evening shift, both my husband and I, both air traffic controllers at Santa Barbara Tower TRACON, reported to work that day. It was a normal sunny day in Southern California, and we were just a normal day-to-day for him and I in the workplace. Unfortunately, a few hours into our shift, we had received a phone call from my mother-in-law's doctor in Minnesota. And a few months prior, she had been diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer, lymphoma cancer. And he had mentioned to us that if we wanted to be able to say goodbye to her, that we would need to get on an immediate flight to go and see her. So we both navigated that situation the best that we could that day. We purchased airfare. We made arrangements for our children. We notified our employer. And we were set to depart LAX on December 5th, 2017 at 7 a.m. in the morning. So as you can imagine, when I left the facility at 10 p.m. that night, the only thing that was on my mind was going to be able to see my mother-in-law, and that I was going to swiftly pack up a few essential items for both my husband and I and get a few things ready for our children. But what ended up happening was, as I was on the commute home, it's about 45 minutes south of the facility, about halfway through, a local pilot friend of mine called. And it's after 10 p.m. I thought it was a little late for him to be calling, but I said, something must be going on important. So I answered. And he said, hey, I just want to check in with you guys. My parents live in your neighborhood. They were just evacuated. Are you guys safe? Do you need any help? And as I'm talking to him, I'm seeing on the left side of the freeway, the hillside just engulfed in these flames. And it seems like it's progressively getting much, much worse as I'm heading south. So I immediately got off the phone with him and I called our nanny to let her know what was taking place. I wanted her to be aware. I wanted her to stay safe. I didn't want to scare her, but I just wanted her to be prepared should we have to evacuate. So after I got off the phone with her, I then called my husband, who was the singular standalone controller in the TRACON that evening and was going to be shutting down the facility and obviously not able to leave because the flying public was depending on him in his important role at the facility. So I did call him. I called the operation. I felt that the situation warranted me to be able to do so. And I asked him if he could get any local pilot reports, if there was anybody flying in the airspace that could maybe give me a better understanding of how close it was to our neighborhood. So unfortunately, there weren't any planes. I believe there was maybe one commercial flight coming in, but he wasn't able to give me any more information. So I got off the phone with him. I called back our beloved nanny. I like to think of her as an angel because she really is to our family. She had made the decision on her own that it was becoming increasingly less safe for them to be there. So she had taken the kids out of bed, woken them up. They were just in their pajamas. There was no electricity in the house. She took our spare car that was already set up with car seats. She left her car at our house, took the kids down to a local shopping center, which was unlit. There was no electricity in the entire community that we lived in. And I met her there. I never went home that evening. I met her in that parking lot. And her and I and our children traveled to my sister's house about 35 minutes south to stay there for the evening. In my mind, I thought, okay, this is going to pass through. Everything's going to be okay. My husband and I will be that much closer to take our flight in the morning. We're going to get this all figured out. My husband was about an hour and a half in trail of me after he left the facility. So he made the brave decision to go against traffic up to our hillside when people were fleeing the neighborhood to get to our house, to check on it, to see if he could grab any essential items or anything that was important should the unthinkable happen to our family. And he was able to grab a box of important documents, birth certificates, passports, our marriage certificate. He grabbed a couple of diapers and a baby bottle. My son was a year and a half at the time, and those things are essential. We needed them. So when he had gotten to the house, though, of course it was dark. So he was navigating the house with his flashlight on his iPhone. He tried to locate our two cats. Unfortunately, they were in hiding, and he was not able to do so. And then he made the drive to meet our family. That night, we didn't know what the future was going to hold. We stayed up all night trying to listen to news. I listened to a scanner. It was unsettling. I wasn't sure what we were going to do the next morning in regards to my mother-in-law, who we were very close to and loved so very much. And I remember I had gone upstairs and I was visiting with my sister, who I'm extremely close to, and I was telling her that I just had this uncomfortable, uneasy feeling in my stomach, and that I was incredibly worried. And she reassured me, like all big sisters do, that no matter the circumstances, everything would be okay, and that I was probably over worried. Everything was going to turn out just fine. The important thing was that my husband and I got to Minnesota. So shortly after that conversation, I went back into the living room. Now, mind you, both our two young children are vomiting a lot. They had experienced a lot of smoke inhalation, and they were very sick. So that was very concerning and incredibly scary. And as we went into the living room, we had the TV on, and there was drone aerial footage of the local area and the damage and the destruction that had taken place that night. And we saw not only our neighborhood landmarks that we recognized, our court with our close neighbors that we love dearly. We saw their homes destroyed, and then ultimately it panned out and we saw our home was completely gone, completely destroyed. I remember falling to the ground, sobbing. It was an unbelievable, unimaginable feeling to experience, to know that you have absolutely nothing left is just beyond devastated, just gut-wrenching. Even thinking about it, I get emotional. I think as a parent, a lot of times, during tough situations for your family, you just continue to move on to regain stability. So I think now, just 5 years later, I'm starting to come to terms with some of the emotions that I felt that day. Because there wasn't a lot of wiggle room for crying, certainly we had to buckle up and work as hard as we could to regain stability for our family and our children. But that morning, in addition, I remember my husband being put in the most terrible predicament that I would hope no one ever has to go through. And that certainly is, he had to make a choice whether or not he was going to stay with his wife and children who were sick and homeless at the time, or if he was going to be able to go say goodbye to his mother. And ultimately, we were very fortunate. We received a phone call from her doctor that morning that told us that we had a little more time. She had turned a miraculous corner, and that he could stay and deal with the current situation that we were faced with. And still, we were both able to get back there and say goodbye to her before she passed.
Your story is so incredibly powerful, Tricia, and I want to thank you wholeheartedly for sharing it with us today. One of the things I've learned prepping for this session with you is that the fire isn't over just because the flames are put out. The longer term processes of surviving and rebuilding is fraught with processes and red tape between insurance and emergency declarations and FEMA protocols and all of the unexpected costs involved. Including with your children. What did you and other survivors face logistically in that near-term and longer-term aftermath?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that, Abigail. It's been certainly a process. We're now 5 years removed from that terrible night, and we're still not completely whole. It took us 3 years to rebuild our home. And as you can imagine, the city was inundated with so many people rebuilding in the aftermath. And it's not like when you find a plot of land and you're going to build your dream house on it. It didn't feel anything but a dream. It was, okay, we're trying to just rebuild the same size house that we had. And there were 22 code changes from the time that our original home was built. And there were so many processes that we had to participate in, and insurance, while we were grateful to have that, it certainly did not make us financially whole. We had to work so hard just to get the little bit that we got. And just a tremendous effort, not only personally, but within our community. All of our neighbors were going through the same thing. We had to move about 35 minutes south. There was no housing available for so many of us here locally. Obviously, we had to find new schools for our children. We had to have our 20-minute commute to work that we weren't, expecting. We were essentially starting over on top of all of the paperwork that was required. It was unbelievable the amount of workload that was required for us to move home. And additionally, during that time, we were also facing the 35-day government shutdown, which both my husband and I, being federal and essential employees, required us both to work without pay. And so, as you can imagine, the emergency fund that most responsible people have was depleted for us. We were budgeting to rebuild. We were, if you can imagine, replacing every item that was essential to our family all at one time. A crib, beds, just the basics. So it was really so much going on and continues to go on. We haven't been able to landscape our backyard, so it's still pretty much a dirt lot back there. But each day we take steps to get there, and it's become a family project, so to speak. And believe it or not, we have found, a lot of enjoyment in the simple things. We value things very differently than we once did.
I can imagine, how significant your financial losses were, but not as significant as some of the sentimental losses I'm sure you've endured, the things you've lost. Sorry about that. I'm gratified that NASA is developing technologies to not just fight these fires, but to mitigate them in the first place, helping with prescribed burns and soil moisture levels and tree growth and all of those important things that we need to ensure that things like this don't happen as often as they do. But I can only imagine. And I know you've told your story to so many people, and today you've shared it with us at NASA. Speaking of storytelling, I mean, you did you did extensive congressional activism at both the state and federal level, which also kind of resulted in that State of the Union invitation. It must have been amazing. Can you share a little bit about how you've approached advocacy and what kind of impact that made for you and for your community?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to touch on that sentimental treasures piece, because I think that is so important to share. I think most people go through life holding on to things that matter to them, whether it be memorabilia from a sport that they played or an award that they won, or an item from a family member that's no longer here. And so losing all of your sentimental treasures really is not for the faint of heart. It is something that for me has been a process to accept and come to a place of gratitude. I now firmly believe that when you depart the earth, regardless of where you think you go or whatever you believe, you take nothing with you, not even those sentimental things. So you carry with you in your heart your memories and the things that you know and love to believe to be true. And ultimately, for me, the fact that my children are healthy and safe and thriving and doing well, that's the most important thing to me. And having, as I mentioned, a community of neighbors, a supportive family, an unbelievable union that I'm so blessed to be a part of. Those are the things that matter to me. And, I lost my grandmother's ring, her wedding ring, and a painting that my grandfather had painted. And those two things were soul crushing. I have never looked so hard. I knew the painting was going to be completely gone, but for my grandmother's ring, you hear stories that people find diamonds and, you just have to have hope and the right equipment. And my husband and I spent days looking for my grandmother's ring. It was so sentimental to me, and we didn't recover it. But I go back to that, what is now true for me with how I value things, and knowing that piece about sentimental treasures, truly brings me peace. As far as the advocacy goes, for me, that's always been a really important part of my life. Growing up, my father would constantly tell me to write my member of Congress, and it became a running joke in our household. One that was stated frequently. Anytime I wanted to lobby against cleaning my room, doing a chore, doing something I didn't want, he would say, write your member of Congress, So somehow that stuck with me. And then I did that as a young adult, and as I matured through life, even prior to becoming an air traffic controller and active in my union in terms of legislative activity, I did that. And I've continued to do that. And through NACA, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, I was given so many opportunities to go to Capitol Hill, to go to members of the House and Senate and advocate for things that we believed in that would impact or improve the national airspace system. Having learned the importance of educating our members of Congress, the importance of stable and predictable funding that is so desperately needed for so many different projects. I think about that in terms of the national airspace system, the important and critical work that all of you at NASA do. It really is something that we must continue to do is get our messaging out, make sure that Congress understands the importance of these critical issues and how they impact so many people on massive scales.
At NASA, we like to tackle what we call wicked problems. And we're going to learn more about the wicked problem, in our next panel coming up, take a deeper dive into NASA's work in emergency response, particularly with wildland fire. But more broadly speaking, climate change and the effects of it, including what happened to you, it's really significant. One of the things that has most inspired me about you and the numerous conversations we've had around this is your eternal hope and strength. What makes you optimistic about the future?
Really, it comes down for me as, channeling inner positivity, trying to find the silver lining in situations. And I think for my family, we're grateful that we were able to rebuild. We're grateful that we are back. But so many people in our neighborhood and in our community were not afforded the same opportunity to do just that. And as heartbreaking as it is, I've been able to also learn so much about the current technologies and the important fire mitigation efforts that are taking place. And there's a lot of hope surrounding that for other people. And I hope that no other family has to endure the type of pain that my family has had to. So I'm hopeful for the future. I'm hopeful for all the efforts and the very important and critical work that's being done.
Trisha, we are at time, but thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your time and your emotional experience with us today. It really puts the work that we're doing here at NASA into perspective and how critical a problem wildland fire is. Our next panel is going to explore, the future of aerial technology and wildland fire fighting, and not just fire fighting, but prevention as well. So there are just far too many families like yours, and it's our goal to make their experience a rare exception and not an all too common tragic norm. So with that, I want to channel some positivity here too, because we've got some great stuff coming up for the rest of the day.